We are back on Taking Care of Business on Current Radio News Talk, 1180, 1230 KGEO, 1410 KERI, 1000 KKIM in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and now 3 times a week on the Internet nationwide through knookmedia.com. So, Waleed Phares, Dr. Waleed Phares, incredible guest. I always enjoy having him on. I wanted to end that segment with that last question I had for him about another attack. And, obviously he's not going to state that, yes, he thinks another attack's going to happen, but I love the way he phrased it. Keep in mind, for 9/11, we had 19 people. Now, because of this new caliphate that we have in Iraq and Syria, they've got a ton of money, they've got a lot of influence, and they have thousands of cells throughout the West and the United States. So I am not as comfortable as I was 4 years ago when we were or 6 years ago when we were winning the Iraq War. So unfortunately, this administration, and I do lay it on the feet of this administration, blew an opportunity in a situation, and hopefully we don't pay for it as a nation down the road, but I unfortunately do see that happening. But we're going to change gears a little bit, not much. We're going to have a friend of mine on who we had on once before, Rob West, who wrote a great book called The Thin Wall. Or The Thin Line, I'm sorry. Did I say Thin Wall?
Yeah, that's it, The Thin Wall. It's confusing.
It's been a long day already for me. And one thing that Rob has done that I totally give him credit for, on Facebook, if you look up POW, you can see there's a lot of people. It's a pretty strong organization, and Rob was the one that put that together on Facebook. And Rob, thank you for that, because as you and I have discussed before several times, that's an issue that's very close to your and my heart, because we still have people that have gone to war for this country that we never bothered making sure that they came back.
That's true, Marty. Thank you for having me on your show again. Appreciate all you do for the POWMI issue.
I appreciate that. I want to start out with that issue a little bit, talking about POWs. When President Obama got Sergeant Bergdahl out, he made the comment, a tradition for America is not to leave anyone behind. And I cringe whenever I hear that, because, for the individual soldier, that's how we felt. That's how we feel, is that we don't want to leave anybody behind. But as a government, that's not necessarily true, is it?
No, it's not true. I think in all wars since World War I, soldiers have been left behind, but in particular, I think we've talked about quite a bit Vietnam, and several hundred troops potentially were left behind.
Yeah, let's go back a little further than Vietnam initially, okay? Because I know, Vietnam you and I are going to talk about a little, but I think it was Chip Burke who had done the forward in your book.
Mm-hmm.
Talked about, to Congress, he talked about, 15,000 American soldiers left in Russia after World War II?
Well, that's a similar number that many people say is more or less accurate, but I believe that could be the case. I think many of them were people who had Russian names, Jewish names, Ukrainian names, and there's question on their citizenship. But yes, the thousands is what he claims.
Well, and I was trying to look up the book this morning, and I couldn't find it. I read it about 2 years ago. There was a book that came out about how the Germans kept American soldiers that had Jewish surnames and put them actually in concentration camps.
Mm-hmm. So that is true. I've heard that as well. I can't think of the name of that book as well.
Yeah, excellent book, but it's because of their Jewish heritage. So, again, this is, these are the kind of stories that, governments don't like to have released because it makes them look bad.
Exactly.
Yeah. So again, my guest again by phone is Rob West, author of a great book and a man who's been involved in the POW movement quite a bit. So let's talk a little bit about POWs in Vietnam. That particular story. We all remember the men coming off the plane, and we looked at that as the end of it, but it really wasn't the end of it. That was only half of the story, wasn't it?
That's true. There was the whole secret war that was going on in Cambodia and Laos, and there were it's well known that prisoners were taken there and not sent to North Vietnam at the end of the war. So there's in question 50 to 100 or so servicemen who didn't come home, who we knew had been taken prisoner. what happened to them? That's sort of the big question.
Now, they were part of a deal. Now, if I remember right, wasn't this a deal where we were going to actually pay for their release for the other half, and we reneged on the money, so the North Vietnamese said, okay, well, the heck with this, and didn't release them? Is that how it came down?
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. And there's a letter written by Nixon that documents this whole thing, and he signed it. It's public knowledge. I think potentially they were close on making a deal happen, but then Watergate happened. And I know you're familiar with that whole scandal and how that sort of diverted the POWs coming home in the early 70s. I don't know if you want to talk about that a little bit. Or...
Yeah. Elaborate on that a little bit.
Well, so in the process of working with the North Vietnamese to bring the prisoners home, as we know, Watergate broke out, and attention was diverted, and a scandal kind of ensued. And over time, people just sort of forgot about, for lack of a better word, just sort of dropped the ball on pursuing the issue. And I don't think it was really pursued again until legitimately until the 90s, when Congress had to look at it again.
Yeah, and you know, a mutual friend of ours, former Congressman John LeBoutier, was really involved in that issue. And I think Senator Bob Smith was involved in that as well, wasn't he? That
is correct. Yes, Senator Bob Smith was as well.
Yeah, we're going to try to have him on in the next couple of weeks to talk about the POW issue.
Senator Chuck Grassley is another person who's still in Congress that was involved with that as well.
Oh, I didn't know Grassley was involved in that.
Mm-hmm.
Good. So, do you think there's any people left there from Vietnam? I mean, these people are going to be, they're going to be my age now. They're going to be in their 60s at least, some in their 70s. Do you think there's anybody left, realistically?
Well, I just have a hard time believing that at this point. I mean, I think it's possible. There was this recent documentary that I'm sure you're aware of that came out where they wanted to have found somebody, but since that was proven wrong with family blood tests. It's certainly possible. Whether they're staying there willingly at this point, I can't imagine somebody's being held in a prison. But, things can happen over time. People can lose their minds. They very well could be thinking they're Vietnamese, speaking Vietnamese, bitter at the country that left them behind. And there are a lot of things that could come into play as to why somebody could still be there and not attempt to reach out and come home. So that's definitely possible. I do think there were prisoners alive in the 90s for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
And even into the early 2000s.
Well, I can remember a congressman, I can't mention his name, who was intimately involved in it in the 90s, and a friend of mine who verified this, he was an intelligence officer. They both feel that when relationships were semi-normalized with North Vietnam, that these soldiers were eliminated because they were expendable to the North Vietnamese at that time. So I hope that never happened, but, one never knows.
Similar stories.
Yeah. When we come back from the break, let's talk a little bit about Benghazi and talk a little bit about your book. We'll be back in a moment on Taking Care of Business on Current Radio News Talk 1180.